In this video, we're going to make a text-based choose-your-own-adventure game with a simple graphical user interface in Unreal Engine. I'll be using level blueprints, structures, data tables, and widgets to make this game. So without further ado, let's get started. In our completely blank default Unreal project, the first thing we want to do is click the Show or Hide Sources panel, then click Content. Next, we want to make a blank level. We won't be using any assets or lighting, just a widget. So right-click, go to Level. I'm just going to call this Level _ blank. Go ahead and open it up. It'll ask if you want to save, and we do. Next, we want the level to load when we launch the project or if we package our game. So we're going to go to Edit, Project Settings, under Project, and then Maps and Modes. We're going to change our Editor Startup Map and our Game Default Map to our level blank. And you can just close that out as it autosaves. Now that we have that squared away, let's move on to bringing in our adventure story. To do this, we're going to think of a data table as our book. Each row of the data table will be a page from our book. Those pages will each contain a page number, a title, a description, and all the possible choices the player can make. So with that in mind, before we can make our data table, aka our book, we need to define a page, and we're going to do that by using a structure. So right-click, go to Blueprints, and at the bottom you'll see Structure. We're going to call this struct struct _ page. When we bring our data table into Unreal after we've created it, the first column of our data table will have a blank name, and Unreal will rename that to row names, and that's where we're going to store our page numbers. So with that in mind, we don't need to make a variable for page numbers because we'll fill that information out in our data table and Unreal will do it for us. So instead, we're going to have a title, a description, and all of our choices. So our first variable, we're going to rename this to title, and it's going to be of type text. Then we're going to click new variable. Our second one is going to be description, and it's also going to be of type text. And then finally, our third variable, click new variable, is going to be called choices, and it's going to be of type name, and we're going to click this little pill symbol and convert it to an array. We can save, and that's all we need to do for our structure, so go ahead and close it. Now that we have our structure, aka page, we can make our data table, aka book. You can right-click and under Miscellaneous make your own data table and manually fill it out. However, that is the least efficient way. Instead, you can use a program like Excel or some notepads even, or in this case, I used Google Sheets. This is the basic adventure I made for this project. You'll notice the first row uses the naming convention we defined in our structure. The first column name is empty. Unreal will rename this column to row name. The second column contains our page titles, which will also be our choice buttons. The third column is descriptions. It contains story information and choice details. The fourth column is choices. Since we will be using an array to bring in our choices, each choice or element in that array must be separated by a comma. Furthermore, the whole array must be encapsulated in parentheses. It is also important to include an exit page and a restart page. The restart page will have all the same information as our first page or our welcome page. The exit page will only have its page number, aka row name, and its title. This is because once the player makes this choice, we will simply close the game. Once you're satisfied with your data table, simply go up to File, Download, and then we're going to choose comma-separated value or a CSV file. Unreal also accepts JSON files, but in this case, we're using a CSV file. Once it is downloaded, drag and drop it into Unreal. It will ask you if you want to import it as a data table, and of course we do. It will also ask you for a row structure. In this case, it is our struct _ page. Once you've selected that, you can just simply press OK. Before we open up our data table, let's go ahead and rename it. So right-click, rename, and I'm just going to call this DT for data table _ book. Now when we open it, you will see all of our data is stored here, and we can access this in Blueprints. So if you needed to change something in here, you could easily click the row you're in and update the information or expand the array and change a number, or click the add element to add another page to turn to. You can also click add up here and make a whole new row that you could fill out for another page. You can also, let's just save and close this, you can also edit it in Google Sheets or whatever and then re-download it as a CSV file. You can right-click it and then re-import the file that you just downloaded, or if it got appended when you downloaded it, re-import with a new file and then target the new file, and it would come back in and be updated. Now we need to set up the level blueprints to give the player control of the mouse. We also need our main interface widget to be created and added to the screen when the level opens. So first let's make a placeholder for the main interface. So right click, go to user interface widget blueprint. We're going to call this WBP for widget blueprint underscore main interface. No need to open this yet, as we are going to set up our level blueprint first. Go to the toolbar, go to blueprints, and then go to open level blueprint. We won't need the event tick, but we will need the event begin play. So if you drag off the event begin play and you type in set show mouse cursor, nothing comes up until you uncheck context sensitive. You'll see that the set show mouse cursor is underneath the player controller. So instead of getting it from here, we're going to recheck context sensitive and then right click and type in get player controller. Then from the player controller, we're going to drag off and type in set show mouse cursor and get access to the Boolean that way. Then we need to hook up the execution pins and we need to check the Boolean to true. Next, we need to create our main interface widget. We need to add it to memory and then we need to add it to the screen. So to do that, we're going to drag off of this execution pin, type in create widget with context sensitive checked. Our class is going to be that placeholder class we just made, so the WBP main interface. The owning player, it says it needs a player controller object reference. Well, we have one right here, so we can just hook that up. So now we've created it and added it to memory. We need to add it to the screen. So to do that, we're going to drag off the return value. So this is getting the reference from memory, and we're going to say add to viewport. And now we can compile and save. When the level loads, we'll be able to see the mouse in the level as well as take an input from it. We will also have our widget in memory, and then we will add it to screen. And we won't be able to see it yet because we haven't done anything inside of it. But if you press play and you click the screen, the mouse won't go away, whereas before it would. And the widget is here. We just don't have any details in it yet. So I'm going to press escape. Let's work on the main interface now. We know our pages have a title, a description, and several choices. So to handle that information, we're going to need 2 scroll boxes. So you can open the main interface. I'm going to drag this over to here. And over here in the palette, under search palette, I'm going to type in scroll box. And the first scroll box will handle the title and description. The second scroll box, so just click and drag it down onto the canvas panel, will handle all of our choices. So for the first scroll box, I'm not going to make it a variable, but I am going to call it page information. And I'm going to anchor it to the center at the top, and then I'm going to click and drag it and size it to just slightly bigger than half the screen, maybe 2/3 of the screen. And that's all we need to do for it. Then I'm going to click the other scroll box, and I'm going to rename it in the details panel scroll box underscore choices. And it will be a variable, as we will need to reference it to add children to it later. So I'm going to come down to the anchors. I'm going to put it at the bottom center. I'm going to type in for position X 0, and then I'm going to click and drag it on down to match. That was just so that I could get it out of the side. Once we get it to here, I'm going to make it fill the rest of the available space. That's all we need to do for it. So now in our scroll box page information, we will be displaying the title as well as the description for the page. So we need 2 texts. So in the palette, search for text. Click and drag it on top of the scroll box. I'm going to drag another one in too. So the topmost one, or the first one, we're going to call it text block underscore title. And it will be a variable. I'm going to come down to the horizontal alignment. We want it to align in the center, and for the vertical alignment, also in the center. I'm going to change the padding to about 20 just to push it away from the top and make sure the description starts a little bit further down from it. I'm going to change in content. I'm going to change the text to title. I'm going to come down to appearance, expand font. I'm going to change the size of our title to about 72 so it's nice and big and readable. And then I'm going to collapse font. I'm going to come down to justification, and I'm going to change it to align text center so that when we update it, it won't go from left to right or right to left. It'll expand from the center. We don't need to wrap this, as it shouldn't be so big that it fills up this whole top, but if you needed to wrap it, all you'd have to do is check this. So let's go to our other text block. I'm going to rename it in the details panel to text block underscore page description. I'm going to put DESC, and it needs to be a variable, as we will be updating it every time we make a new choice and when the game first loads. For the text, I'm going to change it to description. I'm going to come down to appearance, expand font. I'm going to change the size to about 48, so it's not as big as the title, but still big and readable. I'm going to collapse the font, and we don't need to change the justification. Left to right is just fine, but we are going to change the auto wrapping. We're going to check it to true, so that if our description gets to the end of our scroll box, it'll wrap to the next line, and that'll look nice and neat. And then if we have a whole lot of words, the scroll box will allow us to scroll up and down. So then I'm going to compile and save that. So now, actually, if we press play, you'll see it comes up on the screen just as we built it. I'm going to close. Let's hop over to the graph. So up in your right-hand corner, click graph. We won't need the pre-construct, and we won't need the event ticked, but we do need the event construct. When our blank level creates this widget, we need it to go ahead and look in our book and get the data to fill itself out. So to do that, we're going to pull off the event construct execution pin and type in get data table row, and it's going to be our DT book, and we want the first row, or the whatever your welcome page is. In my case, I use the very first row for that, so page 1. And if you right click this out row and split structure pin, you can see it will give us the title, the description, as well as all the choices. But I'm going to right click and recombine that. So now we need to be able to fill out the page, and we know that every time we make a choice, we're going to have to refill out the page. So instead of executing it all right here, we could make a custom event below this and link it up, or we can just make a function and call that every time. The only real difference between a function and a custom event is that custom events can have delays, but we don't really need that, so we're going to make a function. So I'm going to click plus function, and I'm going to call this fill out page. We know in our event graph that our out row is of type struct table. So our function, if we go back to it and we click it, we know that it's going to need an input of struct table. So I'm going to call this DT row. So it's going to give us a data table row or a page. So if you want to call it page, you could do that. And I'm going to type in strct, and you'll see our struct page right here. And that's what's going to pass into it. Now we could just call this function and have the data table row within it, but for readability's sake, I like to have the data table outside of it, just so we know at a glance what we're passing into it, and ideally what it should do without having to add any comments or any extra information. So for the row found, we're going to drag off of that. We're going to call that fill out page function we just made, and this will get called every time we make a choice. So let's go back into it. Now, since we passed in our DT row, we can split the structure pin in here. And then we need to set our title and description. So just control, click, and drag from variables the title and then the description. Drag off of them and type in set text. And we want the set text text. Straighten those up. Set text text. Connect the execution pins. Click them both, line them up. Connect the execution pin. Set title to text block title. Set description to text block page description. And then for our array of choices, we're going to have to generate a button that has the title text on it for each element that's in this array. We don't really have the button right now, so let's go ahead and make a placeholder for that. So I'm going to compile and save. I'm going to go back to our level blank. I'm going to right click, go to user interface, widget blueprint. We're going to call this WBP underscore choice. And we can open that up. We will not need the canvas panel, so right click it and delete. But we will need a button, and if you look at the button's text, you'll see it can have a single child. In this case, it'll be text, and that is clickable. So we'll click and drag that down onto our WBP choice in the hierarchy. I'm going to rename it to button underscore choice, and it will be a variable. Then I'm going to come back to the palette. I'm going to search for text. I'm going to drag and drop that on top of our button. I'm going to rename this text to text block underscore choice text, or just choice. And it needs to be a variable. The horizontal alignment and vertical alignment is fine. I'm going to change the text to choice. I'm going to come down to font size, and I'm going to change that to 48, the same size as our description. I spelled choice wrong. We want the justification to align to the center, and we shouldn't need to wrap because it will be the same size of our title, and it will stretch the same length. It'll actually be smaller because it's 48 point instead of 72. So we can compile and save. We now have a placeholder. Let's go back to our main interface. So we're going to drag off of this array, and we know that we need to evaluate each individual element. So to do that, we're going to drag off and type in for each, and we're going to get a for each loop. So for every element in this array, we're going to execute the loop body for each of those elements. So I'm going to connect up the execution pins. So this element is giving us the page number to turn to. So we can go to the loop body and drag off, create a button for each of these elements. So drag off and type in create widget. And it's going to be of class choice. And the owning player will be the player controller. So right click, get player controller. And we'll hook that up. So now we have the button. We need to attach it to our scroll box of choices. So we're going to control click and drag in our scroll box choices. We're going to drag off of it and type in add child. Connect it up. And then the return value, which is a reference to the choice we just made, which will be made for each element, we're going to connect that to the content. So now for each choice we have, so my first page has 5 choices, so it'll iterate through this loop 5 times. It'll create 5 buttons, and it'll put those 5 buttons within our scroll box. So if you compile, save, hit play, I'll have 5 choices, and my scroll wheel is working. But they all say choice because I haven't passed any of the additional information to them. So to do that, we're going to go back to our choices, go to the graph, and then in our graph, we won't need any of this, so we can get rid of all of it. I'm going to come over here to the variables, and I'm going to add a main interface variable, and we're going to come down here. It's going to be of type WBP underscore main interface. It's going to be a reference because we're only going to make one main interface, and it's going to own all the buttons. So we need to be able to reference it with inside of our button, and it's going to be instance editable and expose on spawn. I'm going to compile and save. We're going to go back to our main interface real fast. We're going to pull off of this return node, and we're going to say set main interface. I'm going to pass a self reference. So just right click, type in self. So now it's created, added to the scroll box, and it knows who owns it. We're going to compile and save, go back to choices. We need to handle 2 things. We need to pass all the data to it and then update it to reflect that data. And then we also need to handle what happens when the button for choice is clicked. So to handle updating the data, we're going to create a function. So come up to functions and click the plus. I'm going to call this fill out choice. It's going to receive 1 input, and that input will be the page number that we're turning to. So we'll just call this page number. And we're going to make it of type name. Okay, so once this is called, we will have the page number. So we need to get data table. So we need to look at the page that it's supposed to get its data from. So drag off and type in get data table row. And it's going to be our DT book, and the data table we are referencing is this page number. And we're also, I'm going to move this forward, I'm going to right click this and promote it to a variable, and I'm going to call it page number. And we're going to connect that up before we get the data table. Okay, so now we can reference this inside the button wherever we need to. And then also we can look at this data table. We can right click the out row and split structure pin to get the title of the page that we're turning to. So you can control click and drag in the text block choice, drag off of it, type in set text, line them up, and we can connect the out row title to the in text so that the choice button will reflect the page that we're turning to. We can compile and save. That's all we really need to do for that function. So let's go back to our main interface. So we created it, we've added it to the scroll box, we've told it who owns it, and so now what we need to do is call that fill out choice. And the page number we're going to pass to it is actually the array element right here. So I'm going to drag these a little bit forward. I'm going to right click and promote to local variable because we'll only be referencing it inside this function. I'm going to call it local underscore page number. Hook up the execution pins. And then I'm going to control click and drag that in and hook it up to our function. So now the choice will update to reflect the page we're supposed to turn to. So next we need to handle what happens when the button's clicked. So when we click the button to turn the page, we need to actually turn the page. So let's go back to our WBP choice and let's go to the event graph and then come over here to button choice and click it. Come down to events and the on clicked event, click the plus. So the first thing we need to know is if the player's exiting the game, because if they're exiting the game, we're just going to close it out. So I'm going to press B and left click to get a branch. Hook those up, and then we're going to get our page number, so control, drag in page number. My exit page is page 9, so whatever your exit page is, this is you would put that number in. So I'm going to drag off of it, and I'm going to hit exclamation point equal for not equal. And I'm going to set the reference to 9 and hook the Boolean up. So if this does not equal page 9, go through true, do everything as normal. If it does equal page 9, quit the game. Return false, and we quit the game. So drag off of false and type in quit game. And it wants a controller reference, so let's right click, get player controller. And hook that up. And we don't need to do anything else for that. So now, if it doesn't equal 9, we need to first clear out our children and our scroll box in our main interface so that we don't stack the new choices on top of the old choices. Then we need to turn to the page and then update all the information in our main interface and on our choices. So to do that, we're going to come over and control click and drag in the reference to our main interface. We're going to drag off of that and type in get scroll box choices. We're going to drag off of its return node and type in clear children. And then hook up the execution pins. Line this up. Next, we're going to get the data table. We're going to turn to the page. So we're going to drag off this execution pin and type in get data table row, the very bottom under utilities. And the data table we're going to be looking at is our DT book. And the row name we're going to use is the page number, because that's the page we're supposed to be turning to if the button is clicked. And then we're going to get another reference to our main interface. So control click, drag it in, and we're going to call the fill out page. So that our page updates, our page will update its title, its description, as well as all of its new choices. And we cleared out the old choices, so the new choices will appear. So let's compile and save. So if we've done everything correctly, our game will now work accordingly. So we can press play. You can see have all my text as it's supposed to be. All my options are here. I can go to my scroll box text. Scroll boxes are working. If I click to make sure my mouse is active in the game, I can click and drag the scroll boxes up and down. Triple digit test, you can see we can have infinite pages. This was just to show off that you could have up to 999 pages. Restart works, story works. We can go through the dark forest, restart, go through the forest, rest, continue, win the game. The exit button works and it quits out the game. And there you have it. If you enjoyed this video and found it useful, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to my channel. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, hit me up in the comments section down below or contact me through any other medium. And thanks for watching.